Good evening. Welcome to our 6th year of Plainfield Parent Community Network, and this is our 16th event, Suicide Prevention and What You Need to Know. Plainfield Parent Community Network is a volunteer network of parents, educators, and professionals committed to creating resources and opportunities for mental health support and education in the Plainfield community, whose mission is to provide lifelong learning in our ever-changing society, working in collaboration with school, home, and community. We'd like to thank our sponsors of this evening, Plainfield Counseling Center, Seminar Marketing Pro, and Linden Oaks. This presentation will be found online recorded at plainfieldpcn.org. You can also find us on the web at that same website or on Facebook at Plainfield Parent Community Network, or on Twitter at PPCN Network 202. Questions or comments can be emailed directly to plainfieldpcn@gmail.com. Tonight we gather to discuss ways to support our children. As you will hear, suicide has become a growing national crisis for our youth. So much, in fact, that our Surgeon General made a rare public warning of the increased anxiety and depression in our youth. In the Chicagoland alone, we've had several students take their lives by suicide. While we never know exactly what anyone is going through, what we do know on the surface, students may look okay, but this may not be the case. While Plainfield is no exception to the national trend, nor do we expect to have any or all of the answers, I do want to share with you some of the programs that our district has been providing students. Last summer, we sent 5 representatives from every one of our 31 schools to mental health first aid training to learn ways to recognize and support our students. They then brought this information back to every one of our schools, and we have a future initiative to get trainers embedded into our district so that that support and training can be provided directly to all of our staff. Every year, we also do a suicide prevention training to every one of our staff members. And as of 4 years ago, we began a program called Signs of Suicide in partnership with Alyssa's Mission. And this program, has an educational component teaching kids the ACT message: acknowledge, care, and tell, so that students can recognize when kids are struggling and that they can then go find a trusted adult. A very good example of this actually happened in one of our middle schools the year that we piloted this program. We had a group of students that were in the hall talking, and there was a social worker just nearby doing what good social workers do, paying attention to their surroundings and listening on some of the conversation. And what she overheard was very concerning. A group of students were talking about a girl who had talked about not wanting to be in school anymore, not wanting to be, not have to go to school, not wanting to be around, not wanting to be around their friends, not really knowing if they want to live. And so, of course, the social worker did what she would normally do and pulled one of the girls aside and said, "You have to tell me what's going on." Come to find out, that student wasn't in school that day, was at home attempting to take her life. And thank God, those students, the social worker heard those students talking, and they were able to intervene and save that girl's life. So we do this screening, this education, and the screening component is asking kids very directly, have you ever in your life thought about killing yourself? Have you ever attempted suicide? Do you have other stressors that are of concern? And in every single situation, we have found minimally one, more like 3 or 4 students who are actively suicidal. They have a plan and the means to carry out that plan. And worst of all, are on no one's radar. Parents don't know about the student. School doesn't know about the student. And through that process, we get them connected to supports and truly save kids' lives. So currently we screen all 6th graders, 8th graders, 10th graders, and 12th graders. And again, in that process, we teach kids that ACT message so that going forward, they're able to intervene and find a trusted adult when these situations occur. We've also incorporated the communities and schools concept, where we're bringing in other organizations, Linden Oaks, Hartgrove Hospital, Heart Haven Outreach, and other agencies to be able to provide continuous supports for our kids. And that's a big shift for us. 8 years ago, when we'd have agencies ask us if they could take our students and see them during school, the answer was no. This is our protected educational time. We need this time. And as we've seen the increase in social and emotional needs of our students, we began changing our philosophy. And now we've not only partnered with them, but they're embedded into our schools. Certainly that's not something that, parent has to want that, and we have to do that during a non-instructional time so that we're not missing, the reason that they're in school. But for a lot of families who are working 2 jobs or can't get their kids because of other things, this has become a welcome addition to the school portfolio. With the addition of 3 years ago, 20 new social workers in our district, again, seeing the trends and the needs. We've had a 4.7 decrease in enrollment when we did that, with a 110% increase in hospitalizations. These are real numbers. These are real statistics, but more importantly, they're our students, and we have to do everything we can to try and support them. We've also, with the dawn of COVID and us needing to go one-on-one, we've purchased software that's able to track and monitor kids when they say things that are concerning. We've purchased Referral GPS, program that will provide a contact person to help families find a therapist or psychiatrist or psychologist that works with their insurance, that speaks the language that they speak, that is the gender that they're looking for, that specializes in the area. There's a whole bunch of host of features that are able to really not only find the right person, but get them connected to that help, because I will tell you, as a daughter of 3 teenagers, navigating the healthcare system is not fun, nor is it easy. And so these are some of the tools that we're using to try and help the families that are looking for that support. Plainfield South hosts Hope Squad, a youth-led, run group that helps facilitate hard conversations and again, keep that ACT message going. And then we had a crisis text line on all of our IDs. That was an initiative that we were putting forward last year before it actually became mandatory by the state. And then, of course, our Plainfield Parent Community Network events to, again, help educate ourselves, our families as parents, our community. And so I'm very happy, I'm very pleased to introduce Jennifer Trivelli, clinical therapist at Linden Oaks, who has a whole host and wealth of knowledge that she's going to share with us tonight. She's been with Linden Oaks for 13 years and has over 20 years of experience in behavioral health, working in community mental health, therapeutic day schools, group homes, domestic violence agencies, and shelters. She's developed curriculum for suicide prevention in adolescent inpatient setting and helped develop and present Road to Zero Suicides initiative to community members in Naperville. In 2020, she attended and participated in a training from the Zero Suicide Institute, which focused on helping health and behavioral health organizations reduce suicide among those they serve. So without further ado, please help me welcome Jennifer to the stage.
Thank you, everyone. Let me just make sure I get this. Okay, there we go. Thank you for having me come to talk tonight. I know suicide prevention, talking about suicide, is not an easy topic for us to talk about. It's not easy to listen to. It's not easy to hear the information, but it's such important information that I can give to you so that we can hopefully reduce the risk of suicide for individuals. So we're going to start off with some background information. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in teens, and really kind of in youth in general. So youth kind of falls in the age between 10 to 34 years old, and it's the second leading cause of death in that age range. Also, every 13 minutes, a suicide occurs within the United States. So that comes out to about 110 suicides per day in the US. And 9 out of 10 individuals, 9 out of 10 people who die by suicide have a treatable mental health condition. We know that 1 out of 3 individuals who die by suicide saw a mental health professional within the year prior to their death. And we also know that 3 out of 4 individuals who died by suicide saw their primary care physician the month before they died by suicide. So we know that there are people who are out there seeking the help, wanting the help, and we know that suicide can be prevented. And so hopefully our goal is to help decrease these statistics. When you look at kind of the death statistics through the years, illness seems to be one that tends to drop off. It decreases typically each year. People who die from heart disease, that number gets lower each year. Individuals who die from cancer, that number gets lower each year. When you look at the suicide death rate, that stays pretty consistent throughout the years, and it's something that ideally we would love to change. Also, we know that about 55% of Americans have been touched by suicide. So more than half of us have some sort of experience knowing or hearing of somebody who's died by suicide. And for me, those numbers are just a little too high. So how do we change these statistics? What can we do? So first, we want to look at some myths about suicide. So the first myth is asking about suicide will put the idea into the person's mind. We know that talking about it to somebody, asking how they're feeling, asking if they're having suicidal thoughts, asking if they're having thoughts of wanting to hurt themselves is not going to mean that they're going to go and do it because they hadn't thought about it before, and now that I'm asking that question, they're going to think about it. What it can do is that it can help prevent somebody from taking their life. If I open the dialogue to talk about suicide, if I let you know that I'm okay with you talking to me about it because I'm asking you those questions, it's going to make the person feel a little bit more comfortable talking to you about that. If I kind of shy away from ever asking the question, somebody might not be comfortable talking to me about it because they might be worried that they're going to upset me, or I'm not going to know what to do with it, or I'm going to be scared that they're telling me that. And so really kind of talking about it with an individual helps to open those doors. Another myth is that someone who talks about suicide is not really serious. And I know a lot of people may assume that, okay, this person's talking about it, they just want attention, or they're trying to shock me. But really, it may be their way to kind of feel the waters, to see who's going to respond. They may be talking about it because this is what they're thinking about, and they trust you, and they want to let you know. And so really, we want to take any talk about suicide, we want to take it seriously and see what we can do to help the person. So the first way that we're going to kind of look at suicide prevention is we're going to look at what are some of the positive factors that individuals have that will help keep their risk for suicide lower, may help prevent suicide. And so the first area we're going to look at is values. And values are what's important to us. Every single one of us has values. We know what's important to us. And so really kind of identifying what those values are can be a key component to suicide prevention. So I'm going to have you guys take a look at the image here on this screen. And I want you to just, without putting a whole lot of thought in it, just choose an image that calls to you. What's an image that jumps out at you? Once you have that image, I want you to kind of look to see, what does that image mean to you? Why did that jump out to you? Why might it be important to you? So those images can represent our values. And what values are, our values are important to you. They are unique to you. There's really no right or wrong values. They're what's important to you, they're what's important to your child. Everybody has their own set of values. Each family may have a set of values, but each person individually has their values. And really kind of looking at, if we go back to this picture here, oftentimes when I've done this activity with parents in a group, parents and adults oftentimes will pick the house as one of their important values. They'll share the book for education. They'll share the little child as part of their family. Those are the ones that tend to get shared with me. Most adults, I don't think I've ever done this group where a parent has said, the cell phone's important to me, or has said, money is important to me. While they all may very well be somebody's values, A lot of adults don't share that. When I do this activity with adolescents and with teens, almost all of them identify the cell phone as a value to them. And while oftentimes as adults, we don't put as much emphasis on our cell phones, for children and adolescents, that's part of their lifeline. That's how they stay connected to people. That's how they stay connected outside of their home to others. And so that's what a value is. It's how we stay connected with other people. It's how we stay connected in this world. So it's really important to kind of talk with your child about what their values are so that you can understand what helps motivate them, so you can understand what might be some of their goals for themselves, what they want for their future. And identify if there are any values that your child has that you may not agree with. We also know that our values change over time. What I valued 15 years ago is not the same that I value today, which won't be the same that I value 15 years from now. So our values will really change over time. But our goal ultimately is how can we help our child, how can we help each other move in the direction of our values? How can we keep moving towards those? Another positive factor that we like to look at in suicide prevention is our protective factor. So protective factors are attributes that we have that help us to be able to do things. So our protective factors are what's going to keep any risk factors that we may have for suicide. They're going to keep those hopefully a little bit lower because our protective factors are in place to help us get through that. There are two types of protective factors that we tend to have. We have internal protective factors and external. And similar to values, these are intrinsic and unique to each person. They're the attributes that we have that help us get through life. So some of our internal factors include being able to problem solve, being faced with a situation and being able to figure out what steps do I need to take to do that, to get through this situation? How can I problem solve? Having coping skills, knowing that if I'm stressed, this is what I can do in this moment is a protective factor. Having tools, having a support system that can help me with those tools is a protective factor. Having goals and plans for my future. If I want to know what I'm going to do next, I don't necessarily need to know what I'm going to do as a child when I grow up, but if I know that this summer I'm planning a vacation, that can be a protective factor for me. That can get me through struggles that I may have between now and the time of my vacation. Having personal, cultural, spiritual, and religious beliefs are also protective factors. Being part of groups that encompass those beliefs are protective factors. And then having overcome problems or situations in the past. Even if that problem or situation could be considered a small problem or situation, the fact that I was able to overcome it means in the future I can rely on my past experience to know that I can get through this. If I have a really hard test that's giving me a lot of anxiety and I study for it hard and I pass that test or I do well in that test, I can look back on that situation in the future and know that I can do it. And that's what having overcome these problems and situations can be helpful. And sometimes it even is reminding your child or reminding somebody that, hey, remember when this happened a few years ago and you got through it? This is the same type of situation. Let's use those same skills. Let's try to get through what you're feeling now in that same way. And then we have our external protective factors. And these are things that are kind of outside of us. So it's having a sense of purpose. Our values definitely help us to have that sense of purpose. It helps to kind of give us a goal or give us something to work towards. Having responsibility for things, having siblings, a team, a group, pets. I actually talked to an individual today who was talking about suicidal thoughts that she's been having and how, certain times of the month her thoughts will get more intense. And I asked her what helps her to get through those thoughts. And she said, my cat. She said, I know if something happens to me, there's nobody here to take care of my cat. So my cat is what gets me through. And when she first said the cat, she kind of laughed and she goes, I know this is going to kind of sound silly that here I am, a grown-up who is relying on her cat to help her get through. And I validated for her that it's absolutely not silly. That's something, here's this animal that you love and care for and you have to take care of that will help you get through your struggles. That's a protective factor for you. Being part of a commitment. So the fact that For adolescents and children, they have to go to school during the school year. For those that have a job, that's a protective factor. They have responsibilities that are outside of their home that they're required to do. If somebody's not old enough to have a job, volunteering somewhere, that gives you a sense of responsibility. You're expected to show up at a certain time and certain dates, and people are counting on you and relying on you. Those are protective factors. Being part of social connections, so friends, peers, clubs, social groups, those are protective factors for individuals. We saw a year and a half ago when the pandemic started and everything was shutting down and groups were not able to get together, clubs weren't able to happen, sports teams had to stop. We saw an increase in suicidal thoughts and suicidal ideations because some of their protective factors were taken away from them. We also know that community connections are great protective factors. Youth groups, belonging to a teen center or attending a teen center is great support. And then another big protective factor is treatment of associated conditions. So attending a treatment program, seeing a therapist, working with a doctor and talking to your doctor or the doctor about how you're feeling, and if there is a mental health condition, having treatment for that, participating in a day program, being involved in that or having been involved in that is a huge protective factor for somebody because now they've gained more tools as well as they have connection in the professional world for them. So I want you to just think about what might be some protective factors that you know about your child and even how you can ask them what might be some other protective factors that they have. So now we're going to move on to what are risk factors. So we've talked about the values and the protective factors, and these are positive attributes that we have to help us when we're struggling. Now we're going to look at the risk factors. These are all the factors that will increase our chance for somebody to have suicidal ideations or to act on their suicidal thoughts. And so risk factors are what increases our risk. So things such as a family history of suicide can increase somebody's risk. Having a history of having suicide attempts in the past can increase our risk. Having mental health conditions, substance use can increase our risk. Stressful life events or loss are risk factors. And we know that stressful life events and loss don't have to be huge events. They can be small events that are perceived and interpreted to be pretty significant for the individual at that time. Somebody who experiences stress and long-term stress over a period of time is an increased risk factor. Long-term physical illnesses and having access to lethal means. So we know that if somebody has access to lethal means, it increases their risk pretty significantly because there may be no barrier between their thought and their plan at that point. And so when we look at risk factors, another way to kind of conceptualize risk factors is I like to think of the situation of somebody having a heart attack. So we know, we've been taught, you can hear it on commercials on TV, you can hear it, you see it in movies, you hear it from your doctor. There are all certain factors that increase our chance to have a heart attack. So somebody who has a family history of heart problems, somebody who might be overweight, somebody who might smoke, somebody who's not eating healthy, has a high fat, high salt diet, somebody who doesn't exercise. All of those factors will increase a person's chance to have a heart attack. Does it mean that they're going to have a heart attack? No, they may go through life without having a heart attack. They may take medication to help decrease those risks, but the chance of them having a heart attack becomes higher. That's what the risk factors are for suicide. A person may have those risk factors, but there are things in place that we can do for them or they can do to help decrease those risks. So I want you to also just kind of think about what might be some of your child's risk factors. What might be some things in their life that can increase the chance that they may have suicidal thoughts. And ultimately what our goal is to decrease these risks. If we can increase the amount of protective factors we have or the person has, we can tip the scales so that there's more protective factors and less risk for them. So now we want to look at warning signs. So similar to the heart attack example, here's this person who has all these risk factors for a heart attack. We know that there are certain warning signs to look for when a person's having a heart attack. So we know if a person complains of shortness of breath or feeling like an elephant sitting on their chest, if they're having chest pains, if they have like numbness or tingling on their arms, those may be signs that they're having a heart attack. And we know if we were to encounter somebody who's experiencing that, our first instinct is to tell them to go to the emergency room or call an ambulance. These are similar warning signs for somebody who's having suicidal thoughts or may have suicidal thoughts. So warning signs can really be broken up into 3 categories. The first one is signs that you may hear. So somebody making statements as, I wish I could end my life. I wish I could go to sleep and never wake up. There is no hope. I may as well kill myself. I have no reason to live. I'm a burden. Everything I do is wrong. I feel trapped, or I just want this pain to end. So they tend to be statements that can be very hopeless. They can be statements that feel very helpless for them or very worthless. And so they're making statements, while they may not be coming out directly to say, I want to kill myself, they may be making other statements that are along that same line. And then there are warning signs where we may see changes in their moods. So we may see an increase in sadness or a lack of enjoyment. We may see that hopelessness or helplessness in them. We may see a significant change in anxiety for them. Oftentimes we tend to associate somebody who's having suicidal thoughts as being very depressed, being very flat, not having a lot of emotion, but a lot of times individuals who are having active suicidal thoughts may be having a lot of anxiety. We might see agitation or irritability, anger or rage, and there may be a lot of guilt and shame or embarrassment that they're exhibiting when you notice these changes in their moods. And then the next set of warning signs is changes in behaviors that you may see. So you may see somebody who's distancing themselves from others. They used to have a larger social group, and now you see that they're starting to pull away and they're isolating more. They're stopping or quitting activities. They were involved in sports for years, and now all of a sudden they decided to stop playing the sport that they played since they were little, and they don't really have a reason why they don't want to play anymore. They're saying goodbye and giving away items. You may see an increase in aggression and agitation. They may be more tired or fatigued, and they can't really explain why. They're going to bed at a decent time at night. They're not staying up on their phone all night. They're getting enough sleep, but they're still extremely tired. Changes in sleep patterns. Increased use of drugs or alcohol can be a big warning sign, and somebody who's engaging in self-harming behaviors. And it's important to note that not everybody who engages in self-harm behaviors is suicidal, but if you see a change in that behavior, that could be a warning sign. So what do you do? What do you do when you see some of these warning signs? You see your child's talking to you about something and there's increased risk or you're concerned regarding their behaviors. What are some things that you could say to them? You could tell them you seem to be in a lot of pain. I'm concerned about you. I've noticed your behaviors change. I've noticed this happened. I noticed that you stopped hanging around with these group of friends. You talked about quitting the team. How can I help you? Sometimes that's the easiest question to ask, but sometimes can even be a hard question to remember of what can I do to help? How can I help you? What can I do for you? I really care about you. Sometimes just validating how you feel to the person and letting them know, it can be a huge way to open the door. I'm proud of you for saying something, and thank you for telling me I'd like to help. And so it can be very difficult for people to sometimes talk about how they're feeling. And so really kind of using some of these phrases can be a good way to open that door for you. So it's also important not only what you say to them, and probably even a bigger piece is how you say what you're saying to them. So you always want to make sure when you're talking about something that's pretty significant, such as how they're feeling or suicidal thoughts, you always want to make sure that you have a relaxed, open posture. Standing in front of somebody with your arms crossed and hunched over is not really going to open up allow the person to really open up and want to talk about how you're feeling to them. You want to use a soft, calm voice if possible. A big important one is to avoid distractions, to put away your own phone, silence the ringer so that they know that they have your undivided attention during this time. You want to pay attention not only to what they're saying to you, but also pay attention to how they're saying. Sometimes we kind of have to read between the lines when we're talking with people, and really kind of understand, helping to see, are there other things that you notice while they're talking to you? And use I statements, letting them know how you feel. Not kind of talking about, well, you're doing this and you're doing that and I'm seeing this from you, but really saying, like, I care about you. I'm scared for what I'm seeing. Can we talk about it? And by using the I statements, it usually has the person be a little bit less defensive when talking to them. So another area, once kind of somebody is struggling with their moods, maybe somebody has had a history of having suicidal thoughts or brings up suicidal thoughts, one of the things that you can do with them is to develop a safety plan. So a safety plan is essentially a written list of their warning signs, a written list of what might be some of their risk factors, a written list of what might be some of the coping skills, who makes up their support system, who is part of it, and who can they turn to when they're struggling in this moment. And having it written out or having it all put together in one place can be really helpful. If we think about it for ourselves, in situations where our emotion levels get really high, we tend to not to be able to think as clearly. We kind of have to muddle through everything that's going on in our head and everything that's going on in our thoughts, and we don't remember all of the things that may help us in that moment. And so really kind of having it written out in a spot is helpful, because then somebody else can say, oh, hey, I know, remember we made that safety plan? Let's pull it out and figure out what are some coping skills that work for you. I know what coping skills that work for me, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those same coping skills will work for you. So really identifying what's helpful for you. Also having the person identify who their support system is. We look at support systems in kind of two ways. Who are the people that can help distract me? When I'm having a really hard day, when I'm having a hard time, when my thoughts I might have really intrusive thoughts. I have thoughts of wanting to hurt myself. Who can I turn to distract me from those thoughts? They may not necessarily be able to help solve the problem for me, but they can help distract me so my emotion levels can start to come down a little bit. And then who are the people that I can turn to for that support? Who are the adults in my life? Who are the professionals in my life that I can turn to when the thoughts get to be pretty intense for me? And also making sure that if your child is involved with professionals, that they have their contact information on the safety plan, so that way they have access to it. Most of us now have phone numbers and all that information stored in our phone, but if your child doesn't have it, or if you have it and your child doesn't, it's a great way for them to have access to it. In addition to like the written safety plan, which you can like Google safety plans and find a bunch of different templates for them, you can also go to your app store, like on a phone or on an iPad, and there are several different apps for suicide safety plans, and all of them are they're all pretty good. They all have kind of the same content and the information, and it's a great place for them to have access to that. Also at home, if you have somebody in your home who is struggling with suicidal thoughts and there's concern regarding safety, is to really make sure that you review the safety plan with them on a regular basis. At Linden Oaks, in our inpatient programs, as well as in our partial hospital programs and our intensive outpatient programs, we have individuals create a safety plan upon admission to that program, and they review their safety plans on a daily basis, just to check to see if there's any new skills they learned they wanted to add, any new warning signs that may have come up, or triggers for what might increase their mood come up in that safety plan, so we can make adjustments to it. Also would encourage you to do regular check-ins with your child, asking them how they're doing. Oftentimes you might just get like a shoulder shrug or a I'm fine, but I've talked to parents who, like one parent started a sticky note like system, and so they had 3 different sticky note colors, And she would ask her child how she was feeling, and then the child picked the sticky note color based on how they were feeling that day, and knew that if they picked a certain color, that automatically meant that they had to do a verbal check-in. If they felt within another color range, it was okay to just let it go at that for that time, but the parent would check in again later on. And so they developed a system in order to make it a little bit more comfortable for their child to talk about how they were feeling. If you do have medications or objects that may be unsafe, to have that locked up. And then the most important part is to be consistent. So whatever you decide to do, to make sure that you stick through it and you do it. Oftentimes what happens is a crisis will happen, somebody's suicidal thoughts might increase, and so now all of these new plans are put in place, and then as things start to stabilize again and things start to get better, a lot of these things will start to drop off. And then if a crisis were to happen again, they're not in place at that point, and everything kind of has to start over. So really trying to be as consistent as possible. I'm gonna jump over to this one and then go back. So if you do have somebody who is struggling with suicidal thoughts, their thoughts are pretty intense, whether they have a plan or they don't have a plan, or they have intent or they don't have an intent, one of the options that you do have is to have somebody come in for a level of care assessment. Most behavioral health agencies and facilities offer level of care assessments. At Linden Oaks, we also offer the level of care assessment, and really what it is a good way for a licensed professional to get a good picture of what's happening in that moment. The level of care assessments typically take, I would say, around 2 hours at most places, and they're completed by licensed professionals who will consult with a psychiatrist to identify what would be the best treatment goals and treatment plans for the child at that moment. So if somebody's having strong suicidal thoughts, they have a plan, they have intent, they have means to their plan, the recommendation may mean that the child needs to go inpatient or the individual needs to go inpatient. If they're having suicidal thoughts and they don't have a plan, or they have a plan but there's no intent and they don't have means to a plan, then maybe the level of care assessment recommendation will be to do a day program or a different type of intensive treatment. Or it could be that the person's had suicidal thoughts, they're not currently having them, they don't have a plan, they don't have intent, but they're not working with a therapist or not working with a psychiatrist, and the recommendation may be to work with outpatient providers. And so a level of care assessment can be a great way to figure out what might be needed in that moment. And then there's also different ways for you to connect with experts. So if you are with somebody who's having suicidal thoughts, you can always call 911 for support and for safety. You can also call the Linden Oaks 24-hour helpline, where you're able to connect with somebody who will be able to walk through what might be the next steps. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline is also a great tool to be able to talk to somebody. And then there's also the crisis text line, where you can text any concerns. All of it's done through texting, which for some people is much easier to talk about than having to talk verbally to someone. And then I believe it's by the summer, they'll also be instilling a 3-number suicide line. So similar to 911 in the state of Illinois, by the middle of this summer, I believe the number is 988, will be the number that you can dial in order to reach one of the suicide prevention hotlines as well. Any questions?
Hi. When you come to ask questions to a child, I guess the concern is, are you becoming too overwhelming by asking them? Where, for instance, right now I'm struggling with my 11-year-old because she's going through the hormones, the pre-teening. She's a 6th grader, so I'm trying to help. I'm trying to figure out, is this just her going through this hormonal thing? She's just becoming older? Or is there something else going on? She's the type of person that's very keeps to herself, doesn't like confrontation, none of that stuff. So ever since a concern came to my attention, every day is how was school? How was your day? Anything new? And every day is just fine, fine, fine. So I kind of want to ask her more, but I'm scared that she's gonna pick up on the fact that, okay, Mom, you're overwhelming me. I'm okay. So that's the struggle that I have right now, where I don't know if I'm asking enough. Am I asking it correctly, or am I doing the right thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it can be overwhelming. If you've never like asked more questions on how you're feeling, if you've kind of like, I mean, I know for me growing up, my mom would ask me how my day at school was, and I would always say fine, and she would leave it at that. And so if all of a sudden now you're asking like, well, what about this and what about this, and trying to get more, it can be very overwhelming in that moment. And sometimes kind of having, especially for somebody who might be a little bit younger, sometimes even having like a picture scale of like 1 to 10 and having them say like, okay, on this scale of 1 to 10, I want you to pick how you're feeling in this moment. And then like they can identify the picture, and that can sometimes be a good way for you to say, okay, well, like tell me more about that, rather than just asking questions that will give more than just like yes, no, or I'm fine questions. I know when I worked inpatient and they would tell me, I feel fine, and I would say, well, fine is not a feeling, and what fine means to me is it's feelings I'm not expressing. So I was like, we have to come up with a different way, a different word for that. And so really kind of sometimes expanding their vocabulary and expanding what different emotions might be can be helpful. Anyone else have suggestions?
So what happened at lunch today? Because usually that's when a lot of the drama happens, at lunch or at gym. And making it a really open-ended question so they can't just say yes or no or fine, and that'll just get them talking. And even if it's just a short answer, you'll still pick up on if it was truly an okay day or if it wasn't. So that's one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think somebody else had their hand up for a suggestion.
I just had a question. So you were talking about the assessment that takes 2 hours if you want to get like a child assessed. What is the cost, or what about families that can't like afford that or don't have insurance?
So as of right now, assessments are free of charge for right now. There are, and I would say probably at most locations, the assessment is free of charge. If you go to a location where like the facility does not accept your insurance, they will, and the recommendation is some sort of program or is inpatient, they'll work with you to help find a location that does accept your insurance.
What do you suggest for, I guess, combating isolation? Like, I have 4 young adults now, but the youngest one is a 16-year-old, and I noticed even with the older ones from younger teenagers to now, they are all in their own rooms. They're all in their own corners. They have their own shows they want to watch, and I am the biggest annoyance to come in and say, hey, what you do for lunch, or who's your friend, and who you talking to, and what are we watching? Like, so how do we combat that? You know, because there's still a part of me that's kind of like, okay, well, fine, do your own thing, I'll do my own thing. But I'm like, that's probably not helpful. So.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think kind of doing exactly what you're doing and going in there and asking them those questions still, even though even though they're in the room by themselves or watching their own show. You having that connection with them is letting them know that you're there for them. They may not want it right at, like they may want to be in their room right at that moment, but I would imagine there's also times where they really enjoy having you come in, and as much as they're going to tell you it's annoying, they enjoy having that interaction. Anyone else have suggestions?
Father of 3 teenage daughters, and one in college, and she came home, and it was great to have everybody together, and by the end of the night, they're all in their rooms with the doors closed. And so when you were talking, it was so interesting, because I was watching every parent that was here, including myself, and we're all nodding our heads, because I think that's what we're dealing with. Maybe post-pandemic, I don't know. Like, we could talk about that for hours. But, you know, we also do a panorama survey, and we just completed that. And the thing where we see the decline in the category of sense of belonging starts at 6th grade and it goes down as they're seniors. So the one thing as a parent and as a school administrator I will tell you, the more you can get them involved, and I do this for my own kids, the more you can get involved, and I don't care what it is, clubs, activities, school activities, community activities, the more you can. And so my one who, I swear she's a shut-in, she's in 8th grade, she'll tell me, well, I did this once this weekend, and frankly, great, like you got out and did something. So as much as I'm a very social being, and I want to be out all the time, I have to respect that she's not, but I also need to push her a little bit to not get out of that cocoon. So I think anything that we can do as parents to get our kids involved in something, and a lot of times, you know, we talk about it with our students, it's a matter of a kid saying, hey, I did this the other day. That sounds interesting. So if we can get our friends to connect them somehow, not just parents saying, go out there and do something. Whichever works for me. Honestly, like I took her rock climbing. We went to this place where you can rock climb. She, like, let's do a daddy-daughter thing. She actually called the friend and said, hey, I'm doing this. So they're talking, like, can I bring her? I don't care, right? Like, let's just get out of the house and do something. You know, I think whatever works for your child.
Mm-hmm.
Not comfortable with this, but I think to his point, finding something that they want to do. Not that you want to do, not that you think is healthy for them, but finding whether they want to go buy a pair of shoes or go get a drink or coffee or something, whatever. Finding something they want, no matter what it means to you. You know, finding that connection, I think it helps significantly. Finding that one-on-one time, even if it's 10 minutes.
Yeah, and I would say not giving up on it,
Yeah.
knowing that you will get that pushback, but not giving up on that pushback.
Yeah, I have a question too. Everything you went through makes me feel like the teens or whatnot want help and want to maybe be prevented or helped through and not die by suicide.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like many wouldn't want that. Is that true? That
So
they
I-
wouldn't want help. They wouldn't want intervention. They're not going to tell you.
So I think that is oftentimes kind of a myth. There are definitely individuals who, like, they may have made up their mind and this is what's going to happen, and there's really not anything that can be done. But when we look at the statistics, to know that 3 out of 4 individuals who died by suicide saw their primary care doctor the month before they died by suicide really kind of tells us that most of them want that help. It's just and oftentimes what can happen is there can be moments where it can be really impulsive. They have the thought and they don't have any way to stop that thought at that moment, and it can be a very impulsive act. But we know that most of them, based on statistics, do want that help. I mean, there will always be individuals who may not ever say anything and it happens and you're like, oh, I didn't even see that coming. And those may be the situations where that might be that 1 out of those 4 that didn't seek the help, but we know that most of them do want that help. Mhm. 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 And I mean, you know your child better, but it may be that even just having her talk with somebody to learn how to express herself in a healthier way, how to express herself that when she, when her friends at school say something that get her mad, how can she respond in a way that doesn't have such huge implications that fall after that? If it was a one-time thing and she said it, I know that there were times where there were, adolescents admitted inpatient and they said, well, I just made that statement because I was so mad and I didn't know what else to say, but I don't want to do that. And it's like, okay, well, now we really need to learn what are some other ways that we can convey, how you can convey how you're feeling so that it doesn't have such an implication. And so really working with somebody would be a great way for her to be able to learn some of those tools to manage what she's feeling when somebody does frustrate her. How can she cope with that, and how can she express that in a healthy way? I think there was another question. Yeah, I think, or did you have a question? Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think having having as open of a discussion as you can that's appropriate for their age, which can be really, I mean, it can be difficult because at 11 and even at 8, we don't know how much they like fully understand and that topic, but you really want to be able to make sure that you have as open of a conversation, because what can end up happening is they can interpret what happened in a different, they can make perceptions and assumptions on what happened that may not be the best for them. And then if they ever do at some point have the same thoughts and feelings, they're not going to know how to react to it. I don't know if anyone else has some suggestions on how to handle that. But I think I would, as being as open as I can with them.
I just would like to know, how can a parent manage having to discipline their teenager and dealing with their depression? For example, if I, discipline my daughter, her depression just worsens, or, she's just not the same. And so how can I, discipline her and not to the point where it's gonna make her, have these thoughts?
Right. And that can sometimes be a tricky line, because as, like in the beginning, we talked about the values, and oftentimes when there is some sort of consequence, usually the values are, like, things that are important to them is what's being used. And so when we even temporarily take that away, or we don't allow them to do something, we're impacting all of the things that we talked about as protective factors for them, which are then increasing their risk. But sometimes letting them know that these are the expectations. This is what's expected. If this happens, I am going to have to take your cell phone for this period of time, or you're not going to be able to go out on this night. You're not going to be able to do that. And letting them know, like, these are the expectations ahead of time, and now it's your choice to make the decision on what you choose to do. And then really kind of, sticking with that decision that's being made, and then even, maybe even needing to watch them a little bit longer. I mean, there are multiple times where individuals will come into the hospital and say they got mad because their parent took away their cell phone from them, but that was the expectation that was set. They knew that was the expectation going in, and so if you don't follow through with that expectation with them, then it sets up a whole different set of issues that can come. So really kind of letting them know the expectations ahead of time, and that way you can kind of work through that with them.
sure that we know as parents how to have that hard conversation, say those hard words to our kids, so that we dispel some of the inaccuracies. If I talk about it more, it's going to, you know.
Yeah, no, I absolutely see the benefit and the reason why we have to have this conversation we're having tonight. Absolutely do. I think it should happen all the time, but it would be great if we didn't have to have this conversation. I do believe that although it is a monumental undertaking, there has to be ways to inform our children to see how, so they see how they are being manipulated, quite frankly, what's happening to them. And because they're being manipulated, they are thus feeling depressed and anxious and not feeling and that's why they're self-harming left and
I agree with you. Again, in other words, not PSD person. I will tell you, schools, we've taken on more than reading, writing, and arithmetic. We have more in history. And we have to do that to get our kids in the door, sitting down, so that they can access that education. But I heard on the radio that schools need to be teaching how to read properly. Schools, there's so much that we're putting on our schools. But we're schools, it has to be that partnership between school and home. We can give the message, sure. I don't know. We can talk about that forever, but I think the important, so huge thank you to Jennifer for being here tonight, because I think that message that has to be priority. It really does. And so if we have more questions, we can continue, but we do have licensed clinical social workers and counselors here from the school, from the Counseling Center, that will be here to answer some of those harder questions about how do I have that conversation. So we've set it up so that we'll have one in each corner of the auditorium, so that you can have a more personal conversation if you want. So Mr. Warden will, before he does though, just a quick reminder, I will go through and tell you all of our members, we're here. Jenny Hanby is here, parent of the district and founder of Summer Marketing Pro. Kai Freeman, principal at Droughton Point, and parent myself, director of student services, former social worker, parent Mary Ellen Miller, clinical director, will be here. Brian Sorrell, principal of Meadowview, and Steve Belcastro, warden of the Plainfield Counseling Center. Christine Belcastro will be here today. This will be recorded. CPUs are outside. We do have a survey in your book. We do ask you to fill that out. It's really helpful for us as a committee to look at future events for us as well. So, Mr. Warden.
First things first, I want to just give a round of applause to Jen for joining us today. She did such a great job. Again, my name is Corey Warden. I'm a counselor at Plainfield Counseling Center. We're doing something a little different that we've never done before, so those of you who want to stick around, we're going to have, so Stephanie, if you want to go, she's waving right there. If you want to kind of go up in that area over there, you get to choose your counselor tonight and do kind of a small group kind of thing. But I wanted to do something really quick before we did that. I'm going to be down here. Mary Ellen and Cassie are right there. And maybe we could just float, or maybe we can all just kind of come together and talk a little bit. We just want to do a little bit of small group work, answer any questions, talk for a little bit about this really important topic. But, one thing that I wanted to do with my group that I'm just going to do with everybody right now is one of the hardest things on this topic. If you open up there's this little flyer in here that we put in our program. And what I would like everybody to do right now is repeat after me, please, out loud, okay? Are you thinking about killing yourself? I'm a trained professional. I worked at Linden Oaks for doing crisis intervention work and asking that question on a daily basis. And it's still an uncomfortable question for me to ask today. And now I've been in mental health for well over 10 years and doing this on a regular basis. So these steps will really help, okay? Being able to ask that question is an important question to ask to get the conversation going. So I just wanted to, just think about how it felt when you even just said it right there. You're not even saying it directly across from somebody or from your child. So there's practice that you probably didn't want to have, but now you have it. So we'll be out and circling out of the office or the auditorium.